You're
on
right.
that one.
You're right. Let's do it.
Let's do it.
All right, let's do a quick sound check, guys. Claire, can you hear us all here?
Hey, everybody, can you hear us? Throw it in the chat bar if you can.
Hello, hello.
Hello, hello.
God, I feel like I'm on a Pink Floyd album.
$50 if anybody out there knows what the famous soundbite "Hello, hello" is from.
Oh, from the wall?
Yeah, got it.
I'm going to see if anybody out there knows what "Hello, hello" is.
All righty, we're good. Welcome, everybody, to the craft of coaching flow states. So today we've got a Flow Research Collective Coaches All Skate, and we're kicking off with Dr. Chris Bertram and Dr. Sarah Sarkis here. The goal is for all of you guys to get to know our amazing coaches a little bit better, and then for us to talk about coaching flow, coaching peak performance, the tools, the models, the science, underscoring all of that, and obviously all of our coaches' experience doing it as well. Just to kick off, Sarah, can you give us a quick intro on your background, how you found out about Stephen's work and how you ended up here? And then Chris, we'll dive over to you on the same thing, and then we'll jump into questions.
Sure. I'm going to end up on some sort of watch list when I get to tell the story of how I got to Stephen. So I'm Dr. Sarah Sarkis, and I am a licensed clinical psychologist. I live in Boston, Massachusetts now. I'm formerly from Hawaii. Lived there for 10 years. And I have a practice that's, I have a private practice, and then I also have like a private consulting practice where I work with people really kind of looking to optimize their wellness. And I found Stephen, of course, through his books, and just saw the rascal just flying off the pages. And then I actually got to him through you, Rian. I was like determined to leave a previous party that I was at working for Stephen. And, here we are. So anybody out there that thinks a high, hard goal is something that's too hard, I'm here to say it actually matters.
You made it.
I made it.
Chris, you wanna let everyone get to know you?
Sure, yeah. Hello, everybody. My name is Chris Bertram, and I am not a clinical psychologist. Let's start there. I'm in my office right now. I'm an assistant professor at the University of the Fraser Valley. I teach and do research here in the area of skill acquisition, how we learn, how we optimize that process. And I also have been for a number of years in the applied world, doing some coaching of my own, some consulting work. I work with Canada Snowboard, all of our Olympic athletes and X Games, crazy people, and work with them in the role of skill acquisition lead and flow coach. So I don't know if I'm the only one in high-level sport who has that title, but I'm super proud of it. And then, of course, I do work here in the Flow Research Collective as a peak performance coach. I met Stephen in a mosh pit at a Bad Brains concert in the 90s, I think.
Yep.
Read a book.
It was true.
It. Rise of Superman.
No, let's go with the Bad Brains story. It's much better. No. Just make up the Bad Brains story. Don't tell them the truth.
You never let the truth get in the way of a good story, Chris. You know that. That's why you're so damn funny.
I can't help it. Be honest. I'm Canadian. Okay.
All right. Fair enough.
Well, great to have you both here, guys. So a couple of weeks ago, I was listening to Dr. Andrew Huberman, our good friend and advisor, on a podcast. And he was saying that the most certain thing we know about flow scientifically is that backwards it spells wolf.
I was listening to the same one, the ritual.
And so on that note, can we talk about whether or not it is possible to coach flow? There's no direct empirical data, at least that I'm aware of, on coaching flow specifically. Obviously, there's lots of kind of indirect research and theory and a lot of anecdotal evidence for sure that we have here at the Flow Research Collective. But yeah, I just want to kick off with that question. Maybe, Sarah, we can go with you first, and then definitely want to get your take as well, Stephen.
Yeah, I listened to that podcast. It was great, and that was a really funny way to drive that point home. And we love Andrew. So yes, you can. And the reason that you can is because it's really about a series of sort of practices and disciplines that go into creating the potential to have this brain chemistry that's accessible to all of us because it lives inside of, it's a chemical potential. And I'm sure by the end of tonight, everybody will hear lots of those sort of tips and tools. But, that's why I never really love the we're going to hack into flow, because it's not really a hack. When you really kind of get under the hood, the people that have it in their life consistently and are able to access its benefits are incredibly disciplined. There's a whole discipline and habit practice around this, and that we can really train to.
Mm.
Yeah, I would add to that. First of all, I would echo the yes part to that. Yes, you can train it. I think it depends largely on how you define it. I think in the context of that podcast you're talking about, Rian, I heard flow state being described as this amazing place that feels incredible. And I think at one end of the spectrum, that's absolutely true, right? Those peak experiences that we get in those macro flow moments. Yeah, that's a great place. And yes, that is a hard place to coach somebody into. Absolutely. But the important thing to realize here that we talk a lot about is that flow is a part of a spectrum of experiences. And the important thing I try to drive home with people is that you can leverage the power of flow even in its more subtle forms. So I told you earlier that I'm in the learning game. I try to look at how we can optimize learning. And if you look at studies that have used flow state as an intervention in a learning study, they show that you can get 2 to 5 times improvements in rates of learning. But then if you ask yourself, well, wait, what's that flow intervention they did in the methodology of that study? They didn't push people out of airplanes and have them solve puzzles with endorphins popping out of their eyes. They just took a little mechanical or magnetic pulse and zapped part of their frontal lobes and put them into a low-grade flow state. And even there, you've got the ability to supercharge learning. That's at a low level of flow, and you can absolutely train that.
Makes a ton of sense, Chris. Because in general, I think we're pretty clear that you can coach behavioral change, and it doesn't seem like a wild stretch at all to say that certain behaviors can elicit flow. And so, yeah, in that respect.
And when you get in the group setting, you have all these other variables. Now that makes it somewhat more kind of volatile, right? And we can get there, but there's also conditions in which, it makes it quite readily available.
Rian, I think there's 3 things that I want to speak to. And Andrew's a good friend of mine. And his wolf comment, which is funny, and I like it a lot. I don't think it's true anymore. Andrew's an expert in a lot of things. He's not yet an expert in flow. And I think if actually he were to fill himself with the flow neuroscience, I think he might actually feel slightly different about that. I think the misconceptions around flow are massive. I get asked all the time. People are like, well, what is your definition of flow? Or I've heard your definition of flow. And I've never had a definition of flow. Science has a definition of flow. And when you work from that definition, you can sort of get forward. But what I wanted to say about the training stuff is that if you look at the literature, Susan Jackson, for example, who wrote Flow in Sports with Csikszentmihalyi, she did a lot of work back in the 80s and the 90s trying to coach this. And a lot of other people did. And they were going from the psychology. And they had a horrible time, right? If you look at the hit rate in that literature and the data, it was up and down. There was nothing consistent. They couldn't figure it out. When it started to shift was in the early 2000s, once we started to have the neuroscience. Because now you can say things like, we know that flow states have triggers. We know that those triggers drive attention to the present moment. We know what the neurobiological changes underneath those triggers are. We have a fine-grained analysis of that stuff, and we don't know how to train from that, right? So we wouldn't be getting the results in Zero to Dangerous in our trainings if those things weren't true, right? Like, where I think it gets confusing is peak performance always only is getting your biology to work for you rather than against you. And so flow has all kinds of, as Chris pointed out, mystical connotations, all kinds of other stuff that people bring to it. That's why I started with Andrew and the definition of flow. When you actually put flow into the container like science has built for it and say, where does this come from? How does it work? And how do you train it? I think you can totally do that. And the comparison I like to give to people is, I think flow research and science is roughly where quantum physics was in the 60s and 70s, meaning we know enough about this stuff to be able to build supercomputers and actual technology out of it. We still don't understand it completely. There's all kinds of huge mysteries we can drive a bus through, but from the practical standpoint, we know more than enough to be dangerous. And I think flow is in the exact same spot. And I wouldn't have said this. I don't even know if I would have said it in 2013 when Rise came out, but the amount of papers that have appeared in the past 7 years about flow, I think it's really actually solid. So the question of can you train flow is really a question of, is the coach willing to learn all the science that is required to know how to train flow? And if you're willing to do that, yeah, you can train this stuff very, very, very effectively.
That tees us up perfectly, Stephen, for the next question, which is for Sarah, although Chris definitely chime in on this one as well. And that's the question of how do you sift through the mountain of new information coming out around flow research, flow science, the papers that Stephen's been talking about since even just 2013, and distill it down into practical advice or tools or strategies for clients? How do you kind of go from research paper to, do this on a Tuesday morning?
Well, there's a lot of things you can do, right? So nowadays it's much easier because, well, first of all, I work here. So we have a mountain of, there's an endless amount of research that you can access, and you have the team, right? Some of it is also like allowing yourself a period of time where you can kind of like schedule kind of getting lost and, really reading disparate stuff, and you can go down some wormholes that are good as well. And then it's individual, like however you synthesize information. And a lot of it in terms of from the coaching standpoint is trial and error, just having enough arrows in the quiver to meet enough different people. Some people are much more physical learners. Some people are going to be much more cognitive. Some people are introverted. Some people are extroverted. So there's all these different factors. And it's really just continuously exposing yourself to the interface of people hungry to do this work. And, being really curious. Like I always look at the footnotes in books and I follow these trails. And the best gems come when you didn't really point your brain in any one direction. Often you come upon a real treasure in that capacity.
Yeah.
Wait, let me pause, Chris. Let me interrupt you for 1 second just to do this because we forgot to do this. Hi, everybody. It's really nice to see you again. It's good to be with all of you. Okay, Chris, keep going. Sorry, we went right into geek talk. We didn't even say hello. So I thought we should pause and say hello. Hi, everyone. Hi, Mom. Chris, please. Over to you.
I love that your mom is here. Is your mom legitimately here?
Rian said she was somewhere in the comments.
Yeah.
I told everybody to say hello to her. Hello to her because she embarrasses easily.
Wow.
I know. You made a 1 in a million.
So on the in the sifting question, for me, I always tell clients that before I give any advice to people about what to do, how to shape their habits and what to do to try to promote flow in their life, I say that everything comes through 3 truth filters for me. One, like, is the evidence there? First of all, you have to go, you have an idea that something's going to be effective. If it's some new neuro hack or some idea that we talk about, is that grounded in some science, first of all? So if that's the case, then it passes its way into the next filter for me, which is, does this actually have application for people in the real world? And that just comes from experience. Like, I'm not going to, give, Mark McMorris advice when he's about to jump into a 70-foot jump, unless I'm fairly confident that the research has direct application into the real world. And so that just takes some time and experience. But that's an important filter for me, because quite frankly, just because it's in a research article doesn't mean it's going to translate into practical, actionable steps. So that's something necessary to think about. And then for me, the last one, which isn't necessarily, a guiding light, but I always try to pass it through my own filters and just say, does this work for me? Do I try these things out and do they work? And that's not to say what works for me will work for you or for any client, but does that framework hold up? And that's why I look at that sort of thing.
Chris, because you brought up Mark. So for those of you who don't know Mark Morris, he's the winningest athlete in X Game history at this point, right?
Yeah,
not just snowboarder. He's won more X Games hardware than anybody in history. How do you coach flow with a guy like that? A guy who actually does know almost all of it. Like what interventions in his life have actually, and please, I know some of this is Mark's stuff, and I'm not asking you to talk out of school about Mark, but if you can share any of that with us, it'd be cool.
Mark is an interesting guy in that he kind of has his own recipe, right? I think there's a reason he is the winningest X Games medalist of all time. He kind of has his own secret. So we try to supplement that with him and with other people on the team by using technologies. Like, we have a drone that I've shown some of my clients, where we get sort of teach them how to recognize different states of consciousness, and that it is something that is under conscious control, and we can top down shift from one state to another. And that in and of itself is groundbreaking for most people, because they don't realize that they can actually go from one state to another by choice. And this is one of the ways that we try to raise some awareness around that. Beyond that piece, we really just lean on flow triggers. So when we show up to training day, it's not, we've got people that are tired, and sometimes it's cold, and sometimes people have had fights with their boyfriend or girlfriend, and we actually have a formalized flow warm-up that is designed specifically to leverage neurochemistry, to leverage hypofrontality where we can, and get some flow on the scene so that we get the most out of those training days. All the while building up some awareness of what this state feels like, so that when you get into competition and the shit hits the fan, you know where to go in your mind.
Yeah, you can't show up on game day and still be training to it.
Yeah, I love that breakdown, Chris. So what do you guys do? I'd love to hear both of your takes on this one. If you begin working with a client who has kind of just never really experienced flow, or at least they're saying they haven't experienced it, how do you jump in with a client like that?
I'm happy to go, Chris, if you
don't
care. Okay. I always just say, come as you are. You're never late to the party. So I don't care where you start, there's fantastic work to be done if you are seasoned in the practice. Remember, it's a practice. It's a whole thing. There's discipline behind this. And if you never have, then great. There's probably less bad habits we have to undo, or different bad habits to undo. It's all, the main thing is during the first time of talking to somebody to really deeply understand sort of where they are at in their life. And you start to see where you can start, right? And for some people, it may be in that struggle piece, right? And other people, it may be more in the recovery. Others, it may be truly that's dialed in, but there's other areas really not making lists, not prioritizing and organizing things so that the next day you can show up and really optimize the neurologic period of time that we have to access this state. But being new should not deter you. And in fact, fantastic. Like, come as you are. We accept everybody. We're like
the other good news about new, right? Like, when you're new to this stuff, we can get you high fast, right? Like, that's the one thing that's really great. Like, there's the two groups of people that are easy to train are total novices and total experts.
Yeah.
Because those are the two groups of people who we're going to get you really high, right? The flow, like, we can get a lot of flow in you. It's in the middle because flow requires skill acquisition along the way, right? Whatever, you don't get it for free. Like, there's all the flow training, and you have to have mastery, or some be on a path to mastery in whatever it is that you're doing that's going to be producing flow. And like any path to mastery, long plateaus, right? And if you're in one of those, and that's, I think we get, I think that happens to us. Like, people come to us when they're caught in that plateau state. To me, that's the hard work. The novices, are you kidding? Welcome to dopamine.
I know, exactly. Also, I want to say one thing that Chris said earlier that's super important related to that, is that it is important to know that there's sort of micro and macro episodes that we can experience, right? And that even what I discover is even in those stretches of plateau, it's almost a reworking, like showing that there are micro elements of flow day in and day out in our life, and that it matters to know it as that, whether that's in work or with your partner or in parenting or in your organization, because those wins matter in keeping you engaged during the plateau.
Yeah. And I would add to that maybe just that I think people, if they maybe have read Rise of Superman and they think, well, I've never jumped out of an airplane before or thrown myself off of a massive jump. Like, I don't know what that feeling is. But I think if you just ask people questions like, well, where have you felt that you are at your absolute best in life? And for some people, it might be a long way in the past. But I find that if you ask people that question, it might come down to, the birth of their kids, or that vacation they went on, or that time they were on that sailboat. And then you start to put the pieces together for them of that has in common with this quite a lot. And so you can basically build some awareness around that is the feeling we're talking about. And then you can dial back and say, well, at smaller levels, it's also a thing too. But I think people, and this is the beauty of what Csikszentmihalyi taught us, is that it's ubiquitous. It's all over the world. And it just is in moments of happiness and pure, feeling of bliss. And I don't know too many people who haven't had that in their life at some point.
And kids have it all the time. I don't know if we call it flow. I might be speaking out of turn.
No, you're totally. I mean, they're developmentally, the prefrontal cortex isn't developed. Their brainwaves are much closer. Children, I don't know if somebody knows what age it changes, but kids' brainwaves are much closer to alpha than beta, right? So, like, they have a much easier time. I bet kids have a much easier time flying your drone, Chris.
They do. You should see it. It's pretty
and that's
impressive.
why they're better at being in the moment, right?
Yeah.
It really is tied into how they can be just totally present in the moment. So I would argue that flow can be trained, going back to the other question.
By the way, I have to say that was not my childhood experience. I was more up in my head as like I was never in the moment as a kid. I didn't get into the moment until I became an adult. And seriously,
is this the therapy segment of our?
This is not the therapy. No. This is, by the way, people. When Sarah says something like, "Oh, that's fascinating,"
That's fascinating.
That's interesting, she doesn't actually mean I'm fascinating or I'm interesting. She means, "Oh, Stephen, my lab mouse is fascinating."
My lair.
That's what she means.
It's true. Guilty as charged. I've been accused of worse.
Yeah.
Guys, in terms of.
Yeah.
Sorry, Chris. No, you go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say on the kids thing, I actually have tried it. When I first got that thing, by the way, if anybody doesn't know about this, it's just like you wear an electrode on your head, and when your brain finds a rhythm that's kind of in the ballpark of what we know to be true of a flow state, it flies a drone, and you feel like a ninja or a Jedi Knight because this thing starts flying around the room and you get your brain in the right place. And the first time I put it on, I couldn't get it to fly. I couldn't figure out what was going on. I was nervous. My kids are watching, and I'm like, this thing doesn't work. And then I put it on my 8-year-old, and she sat there and she stared at it really hard. And then it just starts flying all over the house. I'm like, what are you thinking about? She goes, my favorite song. And I thought, well, why are you looking so intense? She said, well, that's what you were doing. So I thought that's what I had to do.
And you see the flow trigger there was the favorite song.
Yeah.
You see why music works so well for professional athletes and speakers and stuff. They'll put on.
By the way, the music works so well because patterns, right? Whenever we detect a pattern, we get dopamine, and music is built on patterns. So, right, it's a it's a low grade dopamine loop.
Yeah,
especially if you know the patterns.
Yeah.
Love it.
I was gonna say, guys. So we've mentioned as two sort of high flow populations. We've got kids and we've got action and adventure sports athletes. From both your experience coaching, have you seen any other either specific groups of people who do tend to experience a lot of flow?
Oh, coders.
Maybe they're segmented. Maybe they're segmented professionally or by some other psychographic or demographic means. But I'm curious as to other kind of high flow categories of people that you've come across when coaching.
Stephen, you said coders. Do you want to take that one?
I mean, coders are. I mean, first of all, the research has unearthed certain groups, right? But I think the truth of the matter is, anybody who has to be creative for a living, whether it's coding, architecture, writing, producing television, acting, drumming, take your pick, and
theater.
That extends also to professions that we would not normally associate with creativity, right? Accounting doesn't seem like a very creative profession, but I have a bunch of friends who are actually tax accountants, love it because it's really analytical. It's all pattern recognition to them, and they find it very flowy. So I don't think it's a class of people that way. It's how do you approach the thing that you do? And if you approach the thing that you do and your the path to mastery and creativity are real values, like they're baked in foundational beliefs, and that matters because we pay more attention to those things that we believe in. So you're driving focus with that foundational belief on top of it. I think that's sort of, I always said, when I was writing books, publishers always want, what's your category? Who are we selling this to? And I would say, I'm not a vertical, I'm a horizontal. Like the horizontals, if you're interested in peak performance, it doesn't matter what freaking field it is in.
I agree.
I'm your guy.
I agree completely.
Outside of the creatives, which is bang on, I think however you define creativity, yes, that's a high flow group for sure. The other people I see are the people that spend a lot of time outdoors. I think whatever, if you like to get out for walks, or if you like to go and do extreme stuff in the backcountry, it doesn't really matter. I find people who generally connect with nature in some way, shape, or form tend to be more connected to that feeling of flow.
Let me ask you a question, Chris. This is a chick or egg thing, because we know one of the things that flow promotes is environmental awareness, right? It makes us we take in more information, and this usually has a big effect and increases environmental awareness. So do you think, which came first?
Yeah.
Right? Is the question I wonder with that. And there's probably no way to tease it apart, but I often wonder that.
That's a really good question. I think the environment probably first, but I think nowadays they just feed off of each other, right? There's both. People,
it's co-creating.
You get into nature, it triggers flow, but then it also maintains. It helps you stay in one too. So, yeah, you always hit me with the hard questions, Stephen. I can always count on you to stump me for something, and you've done it again.
By the way, Michael Slozars, I think I'm mispronouncing your name, you had a comment about how coding is not creative and not flowy. The book you want to check out, the best book on coding and flow, is PeopleSoft. That was the original sort of coding and flow Bible. I think it was written in the 90s. They did some foundational flow research there. There's a whole bunch of other articles I could send you to, but that's a pretty good place to start.
Nice. Guys, what are some of the biggest takeaways or lessons that you've learned from your clients, and how does that work? I mean, is there to what degree is there a dual relationship there in terms of learning or insight?
Well, this is a great question, Ryan. You should tuck this one away, and it should be universal. It's definitely, I always say, said for years, first of all, the coaching relationship, therapeutic relationship becomes at times a space of flow. And in the end, when your client feels very satisfied with the work that you've done, it's always the result that you learned as much as they learned. There was a mutual, because you were both present, completely present, as whatever was unfolding. So it's really very mutually, I mean, I'm just a dopamine junkie too, right? That's dopamine and oxytocin all day long. Just so that's great. And what I've learned from people over the years, both in flow coaching and in regular life of working with people, is really like how remarkable we can be trained to do so much. And our potential is far past where most of us shoot. Most of us play it safe. We sort of hedge our bet of like, and sometimes you can hear it in people's language. But I'm just time and again so impressed and touched by how much people are capable of. And I don't just mean like, success and greatness, like in healing, in connecting, in creating really innovative technologies. Like people are, for all, however fucked up we are, we're pretty remarkable.
Sarah, I love that.
Speak for yourself, Sarah.
Thank you. I know, of course.
It's a great proxy, though, for gauging how good a coaching engagement was, just how much you learned.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Carl's Bruns Kyler here says, what's interesting is whenever I get on a webinar where a product is offered for sale, the organizer will mesmerize the audience into a flow state that induces belief in infinite possibility and strips people of their logic and causes irrational purchasing.
Yeah.
Thoughts?
So Carl,
by the way,
Carl, let me jump all over this because I so agree with you. I have said this for a really long time that there are a tremendous amount of people in the coaching world who like to put their audience in a flow state or try to, and they will use all kinds of fire walking techniques, for example, among other things, right? Like on and on and on. And what happens when you're in flow? Well, your prefrontal cortex is deactivated. So long-term decision-making is gone. Risk-taking goes up. And right, like selling to people in flow states, as far as I can tell, putting people into flow and then trying to upsell them, it's criminal. Should be criminal. Like against the law. Should be against the law.
What cults do.
Yeah, it's exactly what cults do.
Thank you.
I mean, like, it would be I walk into church with 3 lines of cocaine and then I want to sell you everything, right? I mean, like, come on, it's not fair. It's just wrong. We shouldn't do it. Despite what Sarah said about our possibilities, I do agree with Sarah. I think nobody is really aware of their own capability. That's because capability is an emergent property. So you only figure out what you're capable of by stretching yourself and then stretching yourself and stretching yourself. But the notion of infinite possibility of you can be right, that is also another,
it's bullshit. Everybody's got an aptitude.
And we don't all start from the same place.
Yeah,
so I'm not saying we don't have infinite possibility, but I'm saying we don't start from the same place, and it's going to take a while to get there. And you're starting at you're 60 years old. I don't know. You know what I mean? I'm 50 something at this point. I'm not going to be an Olympic gymnast, no matter how badly I want to be an Olympic gymnast.
Why do I want to see you in that outfit, though?
Oh, you're terrible, Sarah.
I know, yeah.
I'd like to hire some people who don't abuse me sometime soon, Ryan.
Yeah. Yeah, I can feel the tension. So one of the things people ask us a little bit about, which I think is kind of an interesting one, is the idea of coaching people or having clients who are in some way quote unquote more successful than you are. And obviously success is subjective, and there's conventional measures for success that you may not agree with or whatever it is. But in general, how do you coach people who could be viewed objectively as quote unquote more successful than you, or at least who are super high performing or very well known or whatever it is?
Yeah, I'll take that one first, because I felt that. I mean, the very first time, this could be true for athletes. Like, what the fuck am I going to tell Mark McMorris or, any of the athletes that I work? What do I know that they could possibly learn from? Or, some of the early clients I had more in the business world, you might have a $250 million portfolio. You're obviously a stellar, high-performing individual. Yeah, there is that. What do I really have to share and to offer? And one of the really cool things about basing your coaching in a framework that has flow state kind of at its core is that this is really new, bleeding edge information that people just don't know about yet. And when you start thinking about flow as a part of a cycle that includes recovery and how we embrace struggle, even that recovery piece is usually a mind blower for most people that are operating at a high level in the professional world, right? So what you come to realize, I think, is that there is a wealth of knowledge here, and there is a real deficit, I think, in people who really even are professional neurohackers or, professional athletes or just professional corporate athletes. There is much that they do not know, and they are hungry for more information. And you start lifting, some of those lids around, and you see some of these blind spots that they have, and you can make a real impact at any level. I'm convinced of it now.
I'm gonna let Sarah answer this in a second, but I want to say when I started working with some special forces guys, right? The first time I walked into the room, like with a room full of Navy SEALs, I mean, are you kidding? Like, what the hell are you going to teach a Navy SEAL about? Right? It was the same thing, and the reason I'm bringing this up is same exact lesson, right? Especially on recovery and the cycle, and that I think is worth a damn, and works across the board, and a familiarity with the biology, right? The reason, like, there's a cycle, there's science, there's not science, there's biology underneath it, right? This is just how we work as human beings, and if you don't have that knowledge, you just don't have that knowledge. So I think everybody can benefit from that. It took a while to come to that also.
Yeah, I think that's a key point that you both sort of made there, which is that when it's science backed, it sort of depersonalizes it from you, and you're just sharing the science rather than kind of saying, try this, I think this will work because of my opinion or my personal experience or something like that. Do you want to chip in on that one, Sarah?
Well, everything that's been said is great. I would only add too that, first of all, it always helps to just remind ourselves that under the hood, everybody's just human, right? And I've never met somebody, well, I have, but there's a real diagnosis for that. But most of us have all our own sort of first of all, even the most successful people that I've worked with, at a surface level successful, right? They still have dreams and things unachieved inside of them. And they are often very much squarely focused sort of on what is yet untapped, right? So they are coming with the effort to be a learner. But the other reality too is that you have to remember that, if I'm working with a CEO or, anybody, right? I don't have to be good at what they do. I have to be skilled and present in what I do. And usually if you sort of remind yourself of that, it puts you back in a lane that what I'm confident of is my competency and my ability to connect with people. And so I can do that. And I don't have to know what it's like to be the CEO of a major company, right? So that's really helpful too. That you just remind yourself, I'm gonna.
I think there's also there's something to be said, Sarah. I was listening to you talk. Once you've gotten to work with 10 CEOs, 10 professional athletes, right? You start to realize it's not like, you start to realize there's overlap. We were talking 20 minutes ago, Sarah and I, in a call before this call, about how in any profession, it is super lonely at the top, and nobody, right? Like the loneliness that all those people are feeling. I'm sure if there's a lot of coaches saying you see this in your clients, the higher you get up in your profession, the less people there are to talk to, and the more like suddenly, and oftentimes the very things that you want to talk about with a client that you're coaching in, it's not the stuff you ever want to, like, you don't want to be that vulnerable with people you're competing with, or even people you're working with in your own company. So there's no way to even go to somebody and ask for help.
Yep.
So I think once you start to realize that it's not just that everybody's human at the top, it's that there's also like there's certain commonalities at different career stratas, whatever they are, right?
Oh, yeah.
And once you start to get a sense of, oh wow, this is just that thing that happens when you get to this level, and this is that thing that happens when you get to this level, and so forth. And it seems to be almost across the boards. And having some understanding of that from having multiple clients and people you're working with, I think is helpful.
Yeah,
Chris,
and I think
don't just sit there and nod. No, Rand, Chris has got to talk.
I will say this on that point, and on the point you both made, I think is the idea that establishing a relationship early on is really super important. My first hour that I spend with most clients is just, tell me your story. Tell me what goes on. Tell me how you got here today. What was your career arc? What's your relationship like with flow? What are your barriers? Tell me like where your soft spots are. I'll tell you mine. We get to know each other a little bit, and then we can be free to discuss information, because that's where I understand, number one, they're a real person. They understand I'm a real person. And then we can have a real conversation, and we can have a really meaningful back and forth.
So Stephen and I interviewed Chris Voss, whatever it was, a few months ago.
I know, I'm so jealous.
Yeah, he's the man. But one of his great phrases is tactical empathy, which I don't know, always makes me smile, something about it. But in terms of the idea of empathy or rapport building, trust building, what are the good or best practices there when beginning a client relationship?
I try to swear at people a lot.
Oh my God. Nobody listen to him right now.
Breaks the ice nicely.
That's a great question. I never really thought about it. I love Chris Voss. I never really thought about it. For me, that space is just somewhere that's very present inside of me. And I guess what I would say is the most important thing is trying to be completely present in the client's experience with you in that moment. Really any distraction, anything. So like in between, I mean, now I do, now everybody that works with me knows I'll meet you on the streets. I'm doing shrink walking. But when I had an office, in between sessions, I would actually lay down on the ground just for like a minute and breathe and sort of like clear out the past experience and come in totally empty, ready for the next experience. And I do sort of a similar thing in between clients while I'm shrink walking. And
tell the truth, you're actually laying in a coffin that you've had specially built for this purpose. And never mind. We'll come back to that later.
Well, when I get a sauna, there'll be no stopping me. I will for sure be taking clients.
Everybody, this is Sarah, who comes to business meetings and talks to us often from the bathtub. We'll be like, what is that sound in the background?
I was in a cold plunge.
What are you doing?
Yeah, that was
professionals here.
Giveaway.
I was in a cold plunge, excuse me. And I was alternating between the cold plunge and the sauna. But yes,
active recovery in the mid. It's fine.
It was stacking. It was a meeting plus recovery plus a flow practice. But yeah, related to empathy is, show up, be completely present in the moment. It is really hard to dislike someone close up. Like close up, we are more similar, most of us under the hood, than different. And if you get in there and get under the hood, odds are you're going to find empathy from most of the people you connect with.
I will say this too. You can't fake this shit. Like if you're not genuinely curious about somebody and other people and this whole process of leveling up, you're in the wrong business, and you probably shouldn't be thinking about being a coach. It has to be genuine. You can't just walk in and say, this is what you're going to do today. I don't know, that approach doesn't work very well for me. But if we have a relationship and I feel that there's a genuine trust that's going back and forth, that's a place to build from. So if you are, and I'm assuming that people that want to get into this business have a genuine curiosity about other people, great. And if you don't, you will not be able to fake it. You will not be very successful. Trust me.
Agreed, completely.
I think you guys, Stephen and Sarah, both made a key point when mentioning the CEOs and the Navy SEALs that is worth distinguishing, that it is worth distinguishing coaching from consulting or advising or mentoring, because it's not just about, the transference of knowledge, in that you can be an amazing CEO coach and not know the ins and outs of how to look at an income statement or whatever it is. On that note of distinguishing between coaching and other modalities, can you talk, Sarah, a little bit about the difference between therapy and coaching?
Yeah, I mean, this is a great question because I'm trying to answer it myself all the time. So, you can check back in with me periodically. Some sort of truth will emerge. So the way that I really see it is like my therapy clients, like you're really getting sort of in there, and your goal is to, at least for me, is to sort of deeply understand the neurobiological patterns, most of them are unconscious, that shaped who you are currently. And a lot of times the nature of therapy is that you're going to do a lot of metabolizing of trauma, capital T trauma, lowercase t trauma, right? And with consulting, and there's a lot of HIPAA, and at least in America, HIPAA and sort of legal regulations around that, right? It's very regulated around the type of relationship that you can have. The fun part about coaching and consulting is that there's often, my goal is always like, I want to be your private coach. And then my goal, I'm sort of, why bury the lead, is I want you to bring us into your organizations. And I want to work with a team, right? So my goal is always to actually blur the lines that in therapy you would never blur. I would never go into a patient's organization and begin to do work that way. So there are real structural and different components to being a coach or consultant, which in my world, those words are interchangeable. So it's a really good question. There are a lot of things that are different. And I often say to some of the coaching clients that I've worked with over the years, I will oftentimes, if we come across something that seems like it needs more emotional and psychological work, I'll say to them, listen, I think you're going to get more bang for the buck on coaching if you work simultaneously with somebody to work on this trauma. Here's where I see it showing up in your life. Here's where I see it sabotaging certain aspects of how you're leading or how you're managing. And so, they sort of play off each other. I'm really glad, obviously, I'm glad that I have both hats because I can comfortably now at this age toggle between the two. But it's a fantastic question. I'm interested to see Chris's distinctions too.
Yeah, and again, as somebody who doesn't come from a psychology background per se, specifically not a clinical psychology background at all, I'm always really clear up front that what the coaching relationship should look like. And so I usually draw the distinction that, perhaps if we're talking about therapy, and I know, Sarah, forgive me, I know it's not always this, but a lot of times it's looking back, right? And looking back in life and trying to see where that brought you to this point. I said, look, you're here, right? I'm meeting you here today, and I'm meeting you where you are today. Let's talk about now and where you want to be and how we're going to shape habits and create a way forward. Certainly there are things that are going to come up that are relating to barriers that certainly come maybe from the past, but it's more of sort of like a behavioral modification approach at that point. And so that's how I kind of frame the early discussions. And from there, sure, like I said, you start a relationship, other things are going to come up, other discussions are going to come up. But again, I'm always really clear with people that my role here, I look at you like I look at any athlete that I'm going to coach. I'm here to coach you. I want you to get to your goal, and I'm going to give you the best that I can with the tools that I have to help you move in that direction.
Yeah, I think that's a big distinction, Chris, is that within coaching, you question why the person has the goal much less than in therapy, where I think there would be much more digging into why do you want to achieve this, what need is it going to meet, etc. Whereas in coaching, you kind of help them get the job done to a greater degree. Let's see what questions we've got coming in here, guys. Are you guys, by the way, okay for another few minutes, or do either of you have to jump?
I've got a few minutes. I know that Brent and Claire are in the wings waiting, so whenever you want to bring them in, that's cool too.
Perfect.
Yeah, I mean, I can roll with what works.
Okay, let's do two more questions then, and then we'll pull on Brent and Claire. Does flow, and this is from Emily, does flow work differently in male and female brains? And that's, I think, the first element of the question. Second piece, are there differences in general and in how either of you kind of coach men and women?
That's a summit.
It is, yeah, it is. And I know we've had some discussions about that. And I wish Michael was here because I know this is something that he really has taken on. There are biological differences, and I think there is relevance there. But when I deal with clients, I tend to treat everybody similarly. I enjoy the discussions equally, and I found the framework that we use to be kind of gender neutral. And so for me, I don't get into that as much. So maybe from a female perspective, Sarah, you might have a different answer than I do.
Boys, isn't it good that I'm here?
Yes.
I mean, doesn't it look good that there's a girl up here to chime into this question?
Yes.
Let's just have a moment.
I was going to ask Rian to dress in drag.
If I couldn't show up.
And everything.
One thing I want to. We have before Sarah talks to this, we have a giant working group. Claire's involved in it. She can talk to it, but so that is going right at this question. Right, we're looking at gender differences in flow, and I think there's 20-25 people now working on this. So the good news is we're going to have more answers sometime soon on this particular one, at least as far as the science goes. But Sarah, please.
Thank you. Okay, so this is all anecdotal, which I know Stephen's crawling out. I'll get my walking papers at the end of this. But this is anecdotal. I do think that there's a difference for women in flow. I can only speak to being, that's the carcass I'm walking around in. So my experience over the years has been that there does seem to be some relationship between your cycle, your menstrual cycle, and sort of the macro, micro flow. And somebody out there will hear me. Lots of people are signing off and rolling their eyes. But somebody is going to chime in and say yes, and maybe have some wormhole that we can go down and look at. And I know Michael's got a bunch of stuff on this. So I do think there are some subtle differences. I want to take the second question, which is, I think, actually the unsung hero here, which is, do you work differently with men than you work with women? And the answer is sort of yes. For me, it's yes and no. I found that men and women in my practice now is 70% men and 30% women. And it was 30% women and it was 70% women and 30% men. I made a conscious effort to shift it probably about 3 years ago. I think men and women communicate very differently around their feelings, around the things in their life, around accomplishment, around everything. And I think the more you expose yourself to both approaches, the easier it becomes to communicate in a way that, in this case, a man could really hear. And so my experience has been that there are some gender differences that are really helpful to stay attuned to. And the use of language and how we use language is one of those spaces.
It's interesting, Sarah. Back in, I think it was November time, we were doing a big customer discovery and interview process for Zero to Dangerous, trying to sort of hone in the avatar and figure out exactly what our niche is. And when interviewing women, we kept hearing again and again, stress is one of the biggest challenges. And for men who had the exact same careers and the same problems in general or challenges in general, they would always externalize it to, I need more leverage, my team's not good enough, I need to get better at delegating, and it took us a while to realize, actually it's just stress, but the men won't admit it, kind of thing, which is interesting.
Yeah, and you see really there gender things like how we, over a lifetime, orbit around and absorb the things that are happening in our life, right? So it's a fantastic question. And it's, to me, again, to have the capacity to really jive, I was raised with brothers and stuff, so I can jive with men. I like the company of men, and I love working with women. I have lots of sisters as well. So, the more that you can really become comfortable in and working with both men and women, the more success you're going to have. Or know your lane. Like, I knew lots of people who early on were like, I want to work with women. It's going to be this category of it, right? But otherwise, get really versatile, because there are differences, and there are differences in the expectations that they want, the outcomes. So it's helpful.
That's interesting. So final question, guys, I'm afraid, it's from Rav Shari. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. She says, hi from Beijing. I'm a high school teacher and curriculum designer for global learning and service projects. And I'd love to know if you think flow should be taught in schools and if it can be taught safely. And then I just want to add on to that. I mean, Stephen, you've talked about Montessori education and kind of embedding flow triggers within schools rather than directly teaching flow, which I think is an interesting distinction. Whether it would be better to teach it or to create flow-inducing environments, so to speak. But I'll let you guys dive in on that one.
Well, I teach at a university, and it's eye-opening for people, I can tell you. I wish that it would be taught earlier. Like so many things in our education system, especially at the K-12 level, I feel like most of that information is just so outdated and so impractical. And I would love to see real, useful everyday information for people, especially around health and wellness and what the mind is all about. It would be wonderful if they did that. And the other point is, of course, within the educational system, can we leverage principles of flow to help get information across in a more palatable way that drives the learning process and makes it a little bit easier and makes the information more easy to engage with? I think both of those things are lacking within our education system. I haven't heard anybody specifically ask the question of, should we teach it to people in schools at a younger age? Of course, I think that would be a wonderful idea.
Yeah. I mean, I think that any opportunity we have in systems and organizations that have access to this many humans at one time, like an education system, like nothing bad is going to come from, well, let me back that up. Usually nothing bad comes from teaching people how to access the built-in neurochemical power that we have that, power has a range, right? I'm never going to be a physicist. Stephen's never going to be a gymnast. We've covered this. But I think so, yes. And at the same time, I think flow is in schools. Like, you see it on the athletic field. You see it in the theater troupes. You see it in the kids doing robotics, and they have these moments where everything comes together and the dinosaur starts walking. You can sometimes see it in, like, my son was super into chess. You could see it in chess. So I think it's there. It's whether you can scale it to be something that's actually part of the curriculum. And I think it's a fantastic idea. I think you're on to something.
I want to go back to something Chris said earlier when you brought up Rise of Superman. You said people who've read Rise. I think there was no other way to do that, right? Like to really communicate flow to that many people. You wanted the action sport athletes as an exemplar because they were great exemplars. But I actually think I probably did the world a disservice by framing flow completely in action sports, because people now seem to think, oh my God, if I'm not jumping off planes or throwing I can't be doing this work. And that's not true. The one thing I do want to say, Rian, I agree with everything Chris said. I agree with everything Sarah says. There's research. It was done in Germany. I can't remember the team anymore. I've got the paper somewhere. But we do know that the more flow you get, your risk profile goes up over time. Right. And it's not really a dopamine addiction thing, which is what you would think it is. It's not actually that. It's the challenge skills balance. You are constantly pushing on your skills and leveling them up. And by gaining more skills, you want to take more risks. And that's what happens over time. So you are what you would be doing in school is sort of institutionalizing at some level risk training, which I think am not opposed to. Though as I always say, I don't have kids. I don't like kids. I don't know. That's why I have people on my staff who do, who I get to work with. I have colleagues on this who are much smarter than me. So, anything I say about children is massively suspect, but I think that's no. The question I would have about teaching flow in school, because yes, I think it'd be really cool. You have to start really with just foundational self-awareness, with like the EQ skills, self-awareness, self-regulation, emotional awareness, emotional regulation, relationship awareness, relationship regulation, right? And some foundation of that seems to be necessary, right? Which is, I think, one of the reasons why it's often easier to coach adults than kids. Not because the flow stuff is hard, but self-awareness is a tricky thing to train.
Yeah.
Which is a great point, because also now there's a big movement to have like social emotional learning and emotional intelligence learning in schools. So you wonder if baked into that is sort of the start of having something that, also affords them. Although I think kids are the least, we are the ones that are rusty and creaky. They seem to float in and out rather seamlessly. But yeah, the social emotional learning is really kind of everything.
I think this conversation relates to a couple questions I've seen come up in the chat, which is, do you need to educate people on what flow is, or just provide opportunities for flow? And I'm sort of the thinking that in my coaching practice, at least, that giving people some foundational literacy on what's happening is very useful for them. I think the same could probably be said for kids too. If there was intention built around, look, here's what's going on in your mind. Here's why you might be feeling a certain way. Coupling it with some of the things you're talking about, Sarah. And then watching out for some of the dark side of things that can crop up, as you mentioned, Stephen. And that whole aspect is maybe this is a perfect segue for Brent, because he's our guy on the dark side of flow. He could maybe chime in on that.
He's the perfect guy for that topic.
In general, though, Chris, I think that point is huge. When Stephen and I started working together, I used to do all of our intake interview calls, and I must have done over the few years at least 1,000. But the biggest thing that people would mention by far was that they read Stealing Fire, Rise of Superman, and words and even better, scientific words were put to something that they were experiencing. And now, because they had language and they could see it in a cycle and they knew it had triggers, due to nothing more than that, they were getting more of it. So I think just, the languaging and the literacy is crucial. Guys, unfortunately, we got to love you and leave you, I'm afraid. And we're going to pull on Brent and Claire, but both of you have been epic. Any final thoughts or words?
It's really cool to see so many people on listening here, and that I'm assuming that means there's a lot of interest in people who want to get more familiar with this information and get it in the hands of more people, and that's what we're all about here. So really cool. Thanks for being here and for the opportunity to share some experiences.
Yeah, it's been great. Thank you guys for tuning in and great questions. And as always, gentlemen, it's a pleasure.
Sarah, Chris, thank you for lending us your brains. It was enchanting as always.
I feel the same way.
And
It's a mutual admiration
and
society.
I'm sure I'll talk to you both in the next week or so.
Perfect. Bye,
And
gentlemen.
everyone else, see you guys. And everyone else, you can all stay on. We're going to be pulling on Claire and Brent here. So just give me a sec. And I'm going to pull them on, and then I'm going to mention the Flow Trainer Accelerator. Let's see. Alrighty, so we got Dr. Brent Hogarth coming on, who lots of you know. And then super excited to be joined by Claire, Sarah as well, who you've all gotten to know over the last, whatever it's been, 4 months or so in the chat bar. It's a pleasure to have Claire on for the first time.
Doctor?
There we go. What's up, boss? Good to see you, Brent.
Pleasure to be here. Pleasure to be here with everyone here. I just, right off the bat, as Claire logs on, I just want to say what a cool experience to be connected with. It looks over 1,000 people seeking to understand, to apply, and to coach flow. It's a privilege and an honor to hopefully share something that's helpful today with you all. And again, just the sense of relatedness that I feel connected with everyone, part of the Flow Research Collective. It's a joy. And again, Stephen, thank you for putting this all together, and Rian as well.
Thanks, Brent. It's great to have you on. And Claire, huge welcome. Great to have you here.
Hi.
Everyone knows you super well. Lots of folks. So it's great to have you here.
Yes, this is my debut. It's good to be here. Thank you for having me. I think there's a slight delay my end, so apologies for that. So I'm Claire Sarah Goodridge, Head of Client Experience, and I'm a performance coach here at the Collective as well. And I'm currently in Perth in Australia after getting stuck here during COVID-19. So here in my Airbnb. And like Ian said, I know many of you very well. My responsibility is to ensure our clients are deeply engaged with our programs and having quite an extraordinary experience as they develop these, what we call high flow lifestyles. And I have the privilege to head up the coaching team, work with these amazing individuals. And my wheelhouse and my real passion is around embedding flow inside organizational culture for optimal well-being and peak performance. And really what I'm here to do is translate the science and turn it into everyday language for everyday people. So we can sort of scale this thing and make it mainstream.
Super. Great to have you here, Claire. And on the note of programs, guys, I want to take a minute to mention the Flow Trainer Accelerator, which is a training that we've designed specifically for those of you who want to develop or further develop your expertise in flow research and the science around peak performance, and then use that expertise and that knowledge to coach, teach, or train others in flow. It's got 4 main phases or things that we focus on. First off, we help you level up your own performance. So you'll go through the whole of 0 to dangerous. And we really want to make sure that you're practicing what you preach and that you're unlocking flow in your own life. And then what we do is improve your knowledge of flow science and peak performance so that you can speak about these topics with confidence and clarity and authority. You'll get access to the Flow Bible, which has all of the research papers that Stephen's been mentioning in it, going way back beyond 2013. And the third big thing we'll focus on is developing coaching skills so that you can learn how to coach others just in general. So if you don't have coaching skills, this will also take you sort of 0 to able to coach others. And the final 4th element is that you'll get to connect with a network of other coaches and like-minded people who all have a similar aim, which is learning more about flow, advancing the science, advancing the research, and doing this work. And lots of those people are obviously on the call and then also in the chat. So if you want to train with us through the Flow Trainer Accelerator and learn this stuff in much more detail and learn how to coach it, you can pop down a deposit. It's fully refundable. It's a $100 deposit to set up an interview with us to see if it's a good fit. And we're capping this cohort at 100 spots. And there's a $1,000 discount if you pop a deposit on now. And it does turn out to be a good fit after your interview. So feel free to throw a $100 deposit down there. We'll reach out to you. We'll set up your call. And we've got payment plans and discounts and things like that available, which Troy and Jeremy will run you through on the phone as well. The lowest payment plan, I believe, starts at $1,000 a month as well. So we've tried to make it as accessible as possible. So again, if that's of interest, you can pop a deposit down by clicking the shiny green button in the middle of the screen there. So from here, guys, I want to dive back into the questions that we had.
Yeah, Rian, let me first just quickly introduce myself and some of my background to give some of that context.
Sure, go for Brent, yeah.
So hello, everyone. Again, my name is Dr. Brent Hogarth. I'm trained as a sport and clinical psychologist here in Vancouver, Canada. And my background in flow, I started off as a national and provincial gymnast. So a lot of the gymnastics jokes that are being thrown around here are quite personal. So I grew up as a gymnast.
Dude, I'm just jealous. I wanted to be a gymnast, but I grew up in Ohio, and men didn't get to be a gymnast in Ohio when I was growing up there.
Well, we could talk about that later, Stephen, as well.
All right. My sadness.
So I grew up as a gymnast, and then I was pretty much an out-of-control youth for most of my teenage years, sent to military school, finally got some of my life together, ended up doing my undergrad in kinesiology. And after that, working in the fitness industry, I knew there was a lot more I need to learn for myself and my clients. And I had the privilege to go over to India and Nepal and live in some Buddhist monasteries and really start to learn about meditation, learn about mindfulness, emotion regulation. And what I kind of learned in that experience is that, throughout my life, I really sought after very, very peak macro flow states, whether it's all the things I got in trouble doing or extreme sports. And I never really had that workable philosophy for my day-to-day life to put those peak moments into something that enabled me to find almost a deeper flow state, or at least an ease in my day when I wasn't in those peak moments. And so my work as a clinical psychologist, and really specifically within the realm of flow coaching, is really helping develop not just flow state, but this bigger umbrella of self-control and self-regulation, how flow fits into that to assist us in accomplishing the impossible, or our highest and hardest goals. So I did my master's in sports psych, doctorate in clinical, and my dissertation was specifically focused on the intersection of mindfulness and flow state, and particularly, as it's been alluded to a few times, how mindfulness can facilitate overcoming or protecting us from the dark side of flow, which I'm sure we'll jump into. So it's been a privilege to be a coach here with FRC, and again, I'm happy to be here.
Thanks, Brent. That's great and useful background for everyone. So let's dive straight into that, guys. Have you seen a difference in people's ability or clients' ability to get into flow if they already have a mindfulness or meditation practice, just anecdotally? And what is that difference, if so?
Sure, I could jump in real quickly first. So the common feature of flow, the most obvious similarity between mindfulness and flow state is attention absolutely in the present moment. And so mindfulness teaches us how to be here and now. And when we talk about flow, let's just first define it quickly. It's a simplest definition I use is structure and consciousness. So as we move throughout this conversation, I hope we can talk about how to create structure both within our internal world and also in the external world. And so as our courses, they teach a lot about doing both. And part of my role as a clinical psychologist is really diving into creating order in the internal world. So we'll dive into that in mindfulness, both for being able to be present in the moment, but also regulating our emotions, as been alluded to, more effectively. We know that when we're caught up in our emotions, our perceptions are impaired, our decision-making is impaired, and we get fused with them so that they can take away our attention. And ultimately, flow is our ability to be here now again. And so by mastering mindfulness, it helps us just be here now and able to engage fully in this moment.
Nice. That's a great breakdown.
Brent, can I ask you a question?
Shoot.
Because I agree. Like there's sorry, Claire. Did I cut you off?
No, that's okay.
Okay.
Right.
Because there's research. Michael Posner, one of the founders of attention research, was writing about flow and mindfulness back in the 70s and 80s. The one I wonder is, clearly you need some kind of focus training. Clearly you need some kind of nervous system regulation to do solid flow work. I tend to think, but there's a lot of, there's gratitude, there's mindfulness, there's exercise, there's a bunch of stuff. You were very wedded to mindfulness. And I was wondering, is that a personal thing? Because if you come to me and say, of this toolkit, what do I want to reach for first? I would personally tell you to reach for exercise long before mindfulness. In terms of emotional regulation, and even in terms of like focus and skill acquisition and gaining confidence. I'm not saying mindfulness is bad. I'm not saying don't do all these things in combination. But I was wondering if you thought one was more important than the other. And Claire, you can jump in and answer this too. I just was wondering what you guys thought about that.
Yeah, good question, Stephen. I would say, for me, mindfulness, when we think of the flow science and that golden rule of flow, challenge, skill, balance, when people tend to be higher on mindfulness, they have a greater perception of their ability to meet the challenge at hand. And so for me in my life, Stephen, my ego was front and center a lot of the time. So that would fuse me to my thoughts, my emotions, and take my ability away from being able to be fully here and now. And I think, as a side note, a lot of the coaching, when you're working with high performers, so to all the coaches out there, one of the biggest challenges that I see working with individuals in flow training is that there's a constant drive to get somewhere where the ego wants to arrive at. And that constant striving can increase our attention, increase the challenge, and take away the ability to just tackle the here and now. And we know that if we're able to, string this moment of being present to the next moment of being present, then we're more able to facilitate getting into flow. So it was me shifting from complete outcome goals to being able to shift to process goals that mindfulness enabled me to do, and getting out of the trap of really striving towards these high, hard goals that took me away from this moment, really. And anger helped me dissipate my anger and frustration. So, yeah.
Claire, what do you think?
I'll add to that. I think, yes, mindfulness is a super important part of the training. And, if you've been through Zero to Dangerous, you'll know that the foundations of flow training is what we call the positive psychology basics. So that's non-negotiable. We have to start there. And obviously, mindfulness is part of that: gratitude practice, nutrition, movement, social connection. And, a few of those things is enough to create the foundations required to live or create or nurture a high flow lifestyle. So it's quite personal. I find mindfulness the easiest to go to, mindfulness and gratitude practices. Mindfulness is a little more accepted, especially working inside organizations, a little more mainstream. But absolutely, those are non-negotiable basics that have to be in place to move into the actual flow training.
Can I take this, Rian? I'm sorry, I know you were going to ask me another question. I want to take it the next step. Would you say the same thing? Meaning, like, I wonder if there's a hierarchy. And then the next question is, what about social support? Do we think, like, if you're starting with a toolkit, right? If nobody's got any tools, do you think, certainly, like, if you don't have any tools, we're going to start talking to you about sleep and hydration, nutrition, right? Get enough sleep, eat right, drink enough water, because otherwise the organism doesn't work at all. We tend to teach social support, and that I often wonder is in terms of nervous system regulation and the ability to feel safe in the world. Do you think one is more important than the other? Is it very individual? Do you think the biology would say social support is probably more primary than some of these other things? I would guess, but I think it's probably an open question. Anyways, I'm going to shut up and let you guys answer it.
I would say yes, but social support is so individual. So what I need from that perspective is very different to what anyone else would think. So yes, there's always something addressed in my coaching up front, but it's wildly personal.
And let's just maybe tease apart a little bit more of, and so I'll jump back to your specific question, Stephen, but the difference between mindfulness and flow. So there's a lot of different points of view on this topic. Some people believe that they're on a continuum. So mindfulness being the kind of a more low grade flow, and then macro flow state just being when one is, I guess we could say, more present. And some see it as quite different experiences altogether. And so one way that I've kind of looked at it, and Stephen and others, Rian, Claire, I'd love to hear your perspective, and maybe those in the chat as well, is we can think of maybe the difference being when we are mindful, we are sitting on the edge of a stream or a river, watching our thoughts, our experiences, our sense of self pass by. Whereas in mindfulness, or in flow, we almost dive into that river, tackle all the challenges that are going on in our life, and create order that way. Create order by jumping in and hacking our way through life, and by being so absorbed in the task, we transcend the self and feel that freedom. Whereas again, in flow, by standing on the edge of the river, watching and detaching from the contents of our consciousness, we experience that a similar freedom from the self that we talk about so much, of being that one of the core features of being in flow. So I'm curious to riff on that.
Let me just ask you a question, because one, the science is very, very clear that these are different states. Right? Mindfulness, the medial prefrontal cortex right here, totally inactive. This is Judson Brewer's work at Yale, right? In flow, this portion of the brain, this is Charles Lim and Alan Braun's work at Johns Hopkins, very hyperactive. So they're foundationally different. Flow is an action state. You are always doing something, right? That's the whole point. Mindfulness, I don't want to say you can't say mindfulness is passive, because it's clearly not, right? It's also, you're doing something else. But your task is to mind the mind, right? Whereas flow is all, even if it's just play, it's an action state. And I think there are scientific distinctions, there are psychological distinctions that are worth bringing up. Now, the question you read, that said, by the way, the real differences probably come down to things like dopamine, right? So if you're like, I've said before that I think there's a lot of like Kabbalistic, meaning Jewish mysticism, and Tibetan Buddhist meditation traditions that will generate a lot of dopamine, because there's a lot of pattern recognition built in those traditions. It's not like just trying to clear the mind. And there's some of that in Zen too, when you're trying to answer a koan. There are certain technologies out there that seem more designed to produce what we would classically, scientifically define as flow. I do think there are differences. The interesting question about what is the scale of attention, right? Like, that's the real mystery to me, is like somewhere along the line, here's attention and here's absorption and here's engagement. And mindfulness is somewhere on this continuum, and flow is somewhere on this continuum. And it's interesting because in Scott Barry Kaufman, who obviously is one of our colleagues and coaches with us, but in Transcendence, he publishes in that book the quote unquote, like the classical absorption scale, and he's got flow at the low end of it. And I think it's I love that book. I think everything in that book is brilliant except for that chart. And I think that chart is totally screwed up. But I like that, again, what the fuck do I know, right? This is an open discussion and argument. I'm just an opinionated guy who happens to have the mic right now.
Claire, any thoughts on that before we?
No, nothing really to add to that. I mean, this is more Brent's wheelhouse than mine. As I say, I look to these experts and then translate the science into everyday speak. So I'm leaning towards where Brent's at with it.
Says the Ph.D.
Well,
I
would add one thing. So we could think of mindfulness or flow. If we look at it, the 9 initial characteristics of flow, the research suggests that mindfulness increases a number of those characteristics. So concentration on the task at hand, a sense of control, but it doesn't necessarily always lead to that sense of transcendence of a self. the sense of merging of action of awareness. So mindfulness can increase perhaps our accident proneness of entering into flow, but it's not all aspects of flow. So I'll leave it at there.
I agree with that.
Claire, you mentioned organizations. How do you think flow is useful in 21st century organizations? And maybe you can even mention some of the things that you're doing with some of the teams that we're working with now as well.
Yes, so this is my wheelhouse, my very most favourite topic. I think organisations are facing two major challenges at the moment. There's a well-being issue, a mental health issue, and there's a lack of engagement, which is systemic and on the rise. And then there's an inability to adapt and innovate in this global and exponential and ever-changing world that we're existing in. So as we know, flow is a peak mental state where you feel your best and perform your best. So by building a high flow culture where individual flow and group flow are essentially embedded within the DNA of an organisation, leaders are simultaneously dealing with these two problems in the same training. So it's not a wellbeing program and a performance program. It's the same training, and you're solving this problem at the same time. And all it requires is educating people around how to essentially harness their nervous system. So there's like no fancy technology. It's no convoluted leadership frameworks. It's literally just brains and bodies. And the organizations who get this will be the ones that thrive in this world that we're living in at this point. They'll be the multi-billion-dollar organizations of the future. The ones that don't get it will simply become irrelevant because their people will burn out, they'll lose engagement, mental health will be rife, mental health issues, and they will not survive. So for me, it's a no-brainer, and this is why I'm so passionate about translating this science into organizational speak. And it will look different for every organization. It's really anchored to culture and brand voice and values and purpose and all of that kind of thing. And as Rian said, this is the kind of work that we're doing quite a bit of now, stepping inside organizations, training individuals up in a program similar to Zero to Dangerous, and then looking at how leadership practices can continue to nurture and embed the flow inside the organization over the long haul. It's interesting, it requires a lot of the coaching element is really important. That's why I see Flow Trainer Accelerator. It's not only great for individual coaches who are coaching individuals, but leaders inside organizations. And you know, if you're an employee, you're a leader. There's self-leadership and distributed leadership is so important at the moment. So if you can bring these skills into an organization and have the ability to translate the science into a language that makes sense to your context and the people that you work with, again, this is how we scale this globally. And the benefit, I mean, I'm super passionate about up-leveling mental health. I'm also super passionate about forging humanity forward into this future. And to do that, we need to create and innovate and accelerate our learning. And there's just no other way or no simpler way than training people in flow.
Yeah, Claire, it's a great point. It's such a systemic solution that just kind of like chops through all of those desires in one swoop if you get it done right, at least. So I love that. Joan Golden has a question here, guys. It's kind of an interesting one. She says, I'm absorbed in what I'm doing. How do I know if I'm in flow or in avoidance of unpleasantness surrounding me, or does it matter? Sorry if this has been answered elsewhere. So it's interesting, actually, another of our clients who I won't name, amazing guy, but he had an incredibly bad back issue, really bad chronic pain for, I think it was about 12 years. And as a result of that, he would just work basically 14, 15 hours a day, get into flow while working. And it was literally the only cure for his back pain. No medication worked. No mobility worked. And he ended up building multiple $50+ million organizations as a result. So just bringing it back down to the question, how do you distinguish between flow or, you know, avoidance of unpleasantness, whether it's environmental or maybe emotional even?
Well, I'll jump into this, and I'd say you can certainly get into flow in activities that you're doing to avoid whatever is most important to you, right? So that's something, you know, I'll hit on, and maybe I'll share a little map and model that can be helpful for all the other coaches here to kind of help us understand when we're using flow for consequences that lead to positive, or for reasons that lead to positive consequences, or what we might call self-regulation or avoidance. So if everyone has a pen and paper, I think this might be a fun way to share this diagram, and people can follow along. And again, certainly you can get in flow in anything, and that's what the dark side of flow is. It's when we're engaged in flow activities that ultimately lead to self-regulation failure. So avoidance being a good one. So let me take 2 minutes and I'll try to explain this, and it should be fun. So everyone has a pen and a paper. Let's draw 2 squares. And for my clients who have seen me do this before, you can have a laugh, and you can tell me if I'm doing this wrong or right here. So let's imagine this square is our sense of self. So let's imagine this is your sense of who you are. And within this, let's imagine this is what you want to avoid. So let's just say a common avoidance is anxiety. Often we fail at self-regulation because we want to feel good. We want to avoid that anxiety. And so to kind of describe that, let's put some arrows moving inward. So if we put a few arrows pointing inward, showing that this is our attempt to control, avoid, or get rid of this anxiety. This is a common feature we all suffer. It's called experiential avoidance. So for you coaches out there, this is a good kind of term to know. And what happens when we want to control or avoid this anxiety is this sense of who we are now can often shrink right around that anxiety. And we can get into our head and out of our life. So this anxiety becomes bigger and we get fused with it. And the unfortunate reality is avoidance really works, right? It works to dissipate that anxiety. But unfortunately, now when we try to go back into that avoidant task or whatever we were avoiding, it becomes almost scarier. We've conditioned it to be something we fear. And I'm going to tie this into how it works with flow when I look at this alternative side. So let's imagine same challenge, same sense of self, same anxiety. As opposed to turning on the struggle switch in our head, which makes this not just anxiety, but now anxiety of anxiety, shame, guilt that we're getting piled on and avoiding things that are important to us. If we're able to turn off that struggle switch and refocus, I'm going to put some stars out here, on what our values are. So now the arrows are going outward. This sense of who we are can grow. And this is really what flow is. It's changing our relationship to fear. Whereas now fear becomes something that we're not trying to control, avoid, but rather it's something we're willing to burden because we're moving towards what we most care about. And so when I talk about creating structure or order and consciousness, a lot of it's changing our relationship to fear. So it's not something we're avoiding, but something that we own, we accept. We don't label it as something that's going to lead to performance impairment, let's say, but just a refocus on what is in my control right now that I can move towards. And we get that positive reinforcement of moving towards our values here and now. That can make life a lot more easy to step into flow and make that continued progress towards our goals. So I shared a lot there, gentlemen. Claire, I'd love to hear.
Yeah, I just want to say, to start off by saying that I don't think my ego is going to fit inside your little small boxes. Okay, yeah. You're just going to have to expand those boxes a little bit to hold my ego. Yeah, you're going to get. I need some big paper here. Okay, that's like wall side. I'm just saying. Okay, Claire, what were you saying?
Brent, I love the visuals. I'm reading. I don't know if you guys have read the book "Back of the Napkin" by Dan Rome. Great book. Anyway, totally off topic, but he just it's all about how to visualize things and the benefits of doing so. Claire, did you want to share on that topic? Thanks, Brent, for that breakdown. People are finding it super helpful.
All I would add is flow is an ethically neutral state, so you can use it for good or bad. So really anchoring it to values and understanding what those values are is what it's about. It's a state where you feel your best and perform your best, and this is why we don't want to take this to the wrong people. Stephen and I were talking about earlier, it's very dangerous in the wrong hands.
And by the way, just to put a really clear point on this, if you go back to flow, most of the conversations around flow in the 1950s, we talk about Abraham Maslow and we talk about his work. But if you go back to the 1950s and 60s and look in the literature, they're predominantly talking about flow in the context of war among soldiers. Mm-hmm. So I'm not judging soldiers or passing a judgment one way or another, but certainly you can get into flow while killing people, because that's like there's an entire literature devoted to that. There's an entire, and I think I've said this before. One of the things that's really interesting, Brent was talking a second ago about values and their importance. One of the things that we see is that flow was very, very high during World War I and World War II, and flow in soldiers starts to decrease in America during the Korean War and the war in Vietnam. So the wars that were actually aligned with like cultural values were very high flow experiences for people, and the wars that were not aligned with cultural values were a lot lower, which I just find, really interesting. So, certainly you can get into use flow for good or for ill. There's literally, and in fact, if you guys know Naval Hariri, who wrote *Sapiens* and *Homo Deus*, he actually wrote a paper, I think it's like 2007, 2008, on flow and war. So he's done some work on flow and war. I think it's the most contemporary paper on the topic I've seen, but that definitely exists also.
It's really interesting how many people are coming through Zero to Dangerous, how many ex-soldiers, and they're coming through to realign or re-anchor their relationship to flow. It's obviously where they found it in the past, it's been very extreme and not so positive. So that's, we've a lot going through at the moment. It's a very interesting conversation.
It is, Claire, big time. Ex-athletes and ex-military are for sure their own whole category kind of thing. Stephen,
if I can just add a little something here, and Claire, I'm curious if you can build off this. So this aspect of flow and culture. So Stephen, I know when we look at Csikszentmihalyi's, sorry for the noise there, original work in this book, Flow, The Psychology of Optimal Experience, he talked a lot about flow and culture. And so if we think about culture as a whole, but also within organizations, what Csikszentmihalyi talked about is that they reduce their defense mechanisms, essentially culture, for randomness or chaos. And so when we think about in society as a whole, or maybe more specifically for this conversation within an organization, corporate culture is meant to reduce randomness, create norms, create specific goals and beliefs that everyone regulates around. And so when I think about the work we're doing in organizations, it's helping create that external structure I mentioned earlier, through the decreasing the randomness and having, we talk often in corporate culture as far as role clarity, less role ambiguity, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm not sure if maybe we could tie this into a conversation of flow and corporations on that cultural piece.
I think both. So yes, to what you just said, Brent, and to maintain that diversity is also a really important thing. So the really important part of that process is the convergent whole of the organization, the brand, the purpose, the organizational MTP, and values that fall out of that, the brand voice. If that is strong and convergent, then you have the ability to maintain the divergency of the moving parts. So if you're thinking of the organization as a complex adaptive system, you need a convergent whole, you need divergent parts, you need dynamic relationships between the two, and some sort of self-integrating property, which I see as creativity and innovation. So we want that cohesiveness between the people and a shared language, and this is the work Brent and I are doing a lot of work at the moment with a corporate client in the US, and a lot of the work up front is around finding that shared language and then allowing people to self-express in a way that's meaningful to them personally, and then connect that self-expression into the brand or the organizational purpose.
Yeah, I think you're dead right there, Claire. What I found, just even onboarding and selling into corporate clients, is that the first key thing, especially if you've got like a hard charging, skeptical, bottom line focused CEO, is getting them to think of when they've experienced flow, and then really heavily linking it directly into their own experience, and then obviously their own goals and desires, rather than kind of trying to come at them with some external thing. Makes a big difference. So we got a question here, guys, from Josie McKee. So he says, do any of you know of any research on coaching flow to help people with depression, anxiety, or stress injuries?
What's a stress injury?
I'm not sure.
Like
what
I got so stressed out, I punched myself in the face because I do that all the time. Is that what we're talking about? No? Okay, sorry.
Maybe they're talking about burnout. I can talk to that.
Yeah, go for it, Claire. Yeah.
So a huge amount of our clients that come through with Zero to Dangerous in particular are either on the brink of burnout or have burned out and are on their way to recovery, or as we say, back to baseline. Flow is a fantastic way of resetting the nervous system. And I personally, this is how I came to this work. 2016, I burned out after running a series of businesses for about 10 years. Anyone who runs businesses knows that that's inevitable at some point. And so I took some time off and I decided to go and do a doctorate. And people were saying, you're crazy. What are you doing a doctorate for when you're burned out? However, I realized over time what I was doing was prioritizing one of my high flow activities, which is learning and researching and then creating from that place. So I was on a daily basis accessing deep flow. In combination with deep recovery practices, I was able to reset myself and get back to baseline and then move into optimal performance. That's how I found this work. That's how I found it as a solution to a massive problem that's happening inside organizations with burnout, particularly with millennials, which is astounding. And now in the coaching and watching and seeing so many people come through with that issue, often it's accessing more flow that allows them to reset. However, it must have the recovery built in because the flip side of that is too much flow can lead to burnout and stress injuries and that kind of thing, even depression and anxiety. If you're not prioritizing that recovery stage of the flow cycle and you're skimping on that, which a lot of high performers do, that's what I did for years. I skimped on the recovery. I still have to be super strict with my recovery. But if you can do that, then you can essentially make yourself future-proof yourself for burnout, or make burnout essentially an impossibility. And I don't know if the stress injury, if that's what you're speaking to, the person who asked the question, but certainly I would see burnout as a stress injury, and that's been a personal experience and also one that I'm seeing this training in particular being really good for solving that problem for people.
I think on burnout, and Rhian and I have been talking about this for a while in terms of studying this. It seems like if you're getting flow in your primary flow activity, right, and you have a regular recovery period, regular recovery protocol, as long as you're not working for somebody who keeps moving the bar out, right? That's the burnout thing you can't coach against, right? If you have a boss who keeps moving the bars and the goals around on you, or you're working with somebody like that, that's very hard to get around. But unless that situation is present, I think if you're getting flow on a regular basis, doing something you love, even if it's not at work, and you have an active recovery protocol, you pretty much will not burn out. You're pretty much safeguarded against burnout. I think the other thing, Brent put a thing in the chat about Dr. Moore's work from 2013 on depression and anxiety, and that's at the low end of the spectrum. And we also know in Stealing Fire, I wrote about the work done at Camp Pendleton with soldiers with PTSD and flow, using surfing as a flow trigger along with talk therapy. So we've seen this is not there definitely needs to be more work to be done. But we've definitely seen this is across the spectrum, right? From anxiety and depression on the low end to PTSD at the high end. Certainly, this is effective medicine. Is there a ton more to learn about actually using it as a protocol that way? I think so. I think there's lots of questions that we don't really know. And I don't, this is not where the Flow Research Collective is focused, right? We try to go from zero to dangerous, right? We start there. And if you're really dealing with those earlier trauma issues, certainly those are a big issue in peak performance. But to go back to the distinction we made earlier on in this that Sarah made, right? We're working on getting you from zero to dangerous on the coaching, not the clinical side of the spectrum.
Yeah, and I'll just add one. Oh, sorry, Rhian, go ahead.
I was going to say, Brent, Shafali made a great point there. just saying you can't coach around depression, and that, you know, if you're dealing with anxiety and depression, you want to go to, you know, the relevant mental health professional to handle that.
Right on. Yeah, I'll just add, you know, when we talk about flow and the high flow personality, so the autotelic personality tends to be one that's lower on neuroticism, right? And so the challenge, the main flow blocker that I experience with individuals often is that high self-consciousness, high self-centeredness that just keeps them engaged or fused with their thoughts and their emotions. And that the challenge with that is that it's hard to invest your attention completely in the task that you're doing if your attention's constantly being kind of split between how this affects you as a person or your reputation, or, you know, whatever those concepts of self-centeredness or self-consciousness that come up. So if people are able to get into flow, it helps them change their relationship, hopefully to some degree, with that sense of self, so that they're not constantly fused with it. Once they can learn that the joy that comes when they release out of being constantly kind of consumed with worries of self. So that paper kind of hits on some of that. Yeah.
I'm sorry, Brent. I wasn't listening to you. I was thinking about myself. What were you saying?
So, Stephen, I'm going to ask you a favorite question. We haven't been doing any in-person events together because of COVID, so I haven't seen you get asked this question in far too long. So can you please speak to the most effective food, drink, or supplements to attain and maintain flow states, and perhaps specifically address the role of ketosis and intermittent fasting in attaining and maintaining flow states? Now, in addition to getting your take, Stephen, I'm curious as to you guys, Brent and Claire, around anecdotal experience with diet, because obviously the general consensus has been that there's no clear links, but have you guys seen any glaringly obvious trends from an anecdotal perspective with your clients and diet and flow? And Stephen, you want to give your answer?
This is the story I always like to tell when people ask this question. So we always tell people hydration and nutrition matter. Eat, you know, because energy matters. Flow is a energy expensive state for the body to produce. I'm not talking about energy in a psychic woo sense. I'm literally talking about calories. Flow burns a lot of calories. The brain uses 25% of your energy at rest, and flow, it's definitely not at rest. So it's burning a lot of energy. You're using a lot of calories. So it would seem to believe you'd seem to eat well, whatever. I did a 10-year study on myself. And again, this is just me. So this is not anybody else, but this is just me. I tracked everything I ate every time I went skiing. And after 10 years, when I went back to the data and I tried to correlate it with flow, I found that the only thing that correlated with flow is on those mornings when I couldn't actually make a good breakfast and I stopped at the gas station and bought shitty powdered sugar donuts. Those tended to produce more flow than anything else. Now, I will tell you that is probably because I am skinny and I burn through, I metabolize things very, very quickly. I'm an ectomorph and I burn food very, very quickly. And that probably has more to do with that than any general trend. But as a general rule, there doesn't seem to be any correlation. And when it comes to fasting and intermittent fasting and ketosis and all the things that people are talking about, yeah, okay, maybe. You know, I mean, yeah, okay, maybe. My guess is probably for you, yes, because you're into this thing and it's firing you up and it's working for you. Ketosis doesn't work for me at all. Like, doesn't produce energy, makes me sick. It's not good for my body. It's a lousy fit. And so there's zero fat. There's zero thing that works there. Intermediate fasting is a little interesting because it is certainly a little harder to get into flow on a full stomach, right? Like it's a little tricky right after a meal to do that sort of stuff. Again, energy expensive state. At that point, your energy is elsewhere. It's for digestion. So maybe there might be some. I've never seen any data, but I honestly, I tend to think, and a lot of people are going to hate me for this, and I'm going to get lots of nasty comments for what I'm about to say, but I tend to think, as a general rule, a lot of the biohacking stuff, and if I'm getting those questions, you're fetishizing the wrong things. You're looking for something that's fast. You're looking for something that's in pill form. Rather than saying, no, this is just basic psychology, and let's kind of just do this from the way it is. I tend to find people who are really focused on the food thing want flow in a pill. One way or another, they're aiming for flow in a pill. They're looking for a fast hack, some shortcut. And over and over and over, we say, peak performance works like compound interest. It's not going to go fast in that way. I'm not saying there are no correlations, and I'm not saying we won't learn a ton of stuff, and I could be completely wrong. This is just, and again, I'm an opinionated jerk, so I just offended you. I don't actually even apologize. I don't really actually care, but I will tell you I'm sorry, because I didn't want you to walk away from this feeling bad.
Yeah, I think the big point there, Stephen, is with this stuff, it is very end to one. I mean, if you do intermittent fasting and ketosis, and it as some people are saying, reduces brain fog or inflammation, you know what I mean? If it's working, 100% go for it. But it's probably the more generalized diet recommendations, for example, that don't make sense in this case. Do you guys have any thoughts on big trends, though, or patterns you've seen with clients around diet or fasting or other elements, nutrition?
Well, I would say, the majority of our clients are doing the intermittent fasting. That's pretty popular. Personally, I find that works for me, but I don't approach to nutrition just purely because, as Stephen said, there's just the science isn't there yet. And I think diet is just wildly personal, so it would be a difficult thing to build into this kind of coaching or training. But fasting is popular and hydration is key. They're the two things I'll say.
Yeah, I'd just say
hydration, you mean lots of coffee, right? Like we're hydrating with coffee, right?
No, champagne.
Champagne. Oh, my bad. Much better.
I would say, Rian, as far as trends, there's certainly a trend for nootropics. So whether it's ones that are accelerating attention, Stephen's rolling his eyes, but there certainly is a trend towards looking for nootropics that increase attention, or those minor psychedelic microdosing for reducing some of the activity in the frontal cortex. There is this common mechanism. Stephen, I'm curious, I know you pushed back on this a little bit, but this common mechanism that Arnie Dietrich talks about as far as the connection of all altered states of consciousness being that transient hypofrontality. So do you not see that in minor
No, I think Arnie's a friend of mine, and I've been a huge fan of the transient hypofrontality hypothesis really since he first published that book. I do love it. There is pushback against it, right? 90% of the flow studies find it, but there are imaging studies that don't. So there is some pushback. It's not 100% that it's everywhere. I do tend to think it's there, but you asked a question about microdosing and nootropics and those. I've said for a long time, one of the main reasons most nootropics don't work is it's too new, right? You want to know what nootropics will work: cannabis, nicotine, and caffeine, tobacco, coffee, tea, and marijuana. And the reason is, I'm not advocating these substances, but we co-evolved with them, right? This is Michael Pollan's point in The Botany of Desire. We evolved with these substances. The body works with them. As a general, with a lot of nutraceuticals, you get people spending a lot of money. They get a placebo. It's very hard, right? Because some placebo effects, powerful placebo effects, especially if you're in a culture that is supporting the work you're doing. So a bunch of people are all taking the same nutraceutical. You get a 3-month placebo effect. And those could be huge. I'm not saying bad. I mean, that's not placebo effect. It's, you know what I mean? You're going to get a result for 3 months, but you're going to plateau. And the only stuff that doesn't seem to plateau and disappear after 3 months are things we co-evolved with. Because again, there's no hack. It's just getting your biology to work for you rather than against you. And I'm not saying it's always going to be this way. Good God, the science is moving really fast. But I do think this is kind of where we are right now. And I always tell people, before you want to talk to me about nutraceuticals, just pull up a map on Google of the human endocrine system And forget about how complicated the brain is. Just take a look at what the actual human endocrine system looks like. And it really looks like the New York subway system on acid. And to say that I'm going to put in input A up here to get result, B down here for everybody across the boards is crazy. I mean, it's crazy. That's like literally insanity. So, and Rian's point is also the other point, which is a lot of this stuff is end to one, meaning what works for me is not going to work for you, right? This is why over and over and over at the collective, we always, personality doesn't scale, biology scales, right? What works for me, what works for Rian, what works for Claire, is probably almost guaranteed not to work for you. Follow the science, don't follow our egos, right? Like that's, definitely don't follow my ego. But just gets in trouble. Gets me into trouble. So pardon me?
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead. I've been talking for long enough.
No, I was just going to say, to clarify for folks in the comments, Stephen's not saying that, eating just generally healthily in a way that makes you feel good doesn't matter as well.
No, I did start there. Like, I think nutrition, and I eat really well. Like, if you're looking for like, in terms of like, I do that. I think it really matters. Over time, I don't think you can exist on powdered sugar donuts and have a high flow lifestyle at all. So no, I'm not saying that, but I don't think you're going to get more food if you're eating only green vegetables this week, and next week it's only the purple vegetables, and the week after that we're on the orange. I just don't think any of those things are exactly going to work for you.
Are you guys up for going for 2 more questions?
Yes, but I have a question that I'm going to push. I'm going to push back a little on. Not necessarily push back on Stephen.
You want to comment, mate, Brent?
Yeah.
What you got?
No, I want to talk about just, earlier I mentioned that one of the key flow blockers for people is when they have a high sense of self-centeredness or self-consciousness. And we know that when people have some sort of mystical experience, whether they're out in nature, whether they have it in maybe even sport, if they're able to integrate it after, or if they have some sort of religious, mystical, psychedelic experience, that they connect to a sense of awe, and they connect to a sense of that small self or humility that enables them to become less self-centered, less self-conscious, and therefore hypothetically experience more flow. So would you say that those type of experiences can have an after effect? So it's not just the placebo in the moment, but a change in their perception of themselves, reality, and where they fit in. So Stephen's gone. He's in a mystical experience. And
I was just sort of thinking about. I was thinking about your question. I was also looking at Oz, who wanted to argue with me in the comments. And Oz, I will tell you, you're an absolute expert in this stuff, and you've been doing it for 45 years. And yes, of course, you're getting results for yourself. You've been doing it for 45 years, and you're an expert, and you work in this field. There's a difference between sort of what you're doing in general nutraceuticals. So that's my Oz comment. Back to Brent. What did you say?
So having a sense of awe, whether it's in a mystical, spiritual, psychedelic experience, connects us to a small sense of self, a sense of humility, essentially. Mm-hmm. One of my favorite quotes from the Tao Te Ching is, all rivers flow to the ocean because it puts itself below them. Its humility is what gives it its power. And in many ways, those psychedelic experiences can sometimes facilitate that for people. I'm not an advocate necessarily for psychedelics, but that's a lot of case studies and a big trend that people are leaning on. So I'd love to hear more of your perception on that.
Are you asking me about microdosing and psychedelics as like flow hacks? Are you asking me about awe as an experience? Like, I can talk about all of them if you want, but they seem like they're different questions.
The question is, can a sense of awe and humility that we get in, let's say, transcendental experiences, can that facilitate, you hypothesize, greater flow in people's life when they're outside of those experiences, after those experiences have passed? Yeah.
So one, let's park off for half a second and talk about certainly what we know. And you mentioned earlier the autotelic personality, and as you know, humility right, that's a big component of the autotelic personality, right? Like, and for the reasons you pointed out, right? If too self-conscious, too in your head, too how does this make me look kind of thing, right? It blocks flow. And I'm not going to tell the story because it's long, but like that particular, like and it's not like literally the act of like, if you're an athlete and you're a skier and you try to like compare yourself to how another skier looked, and you're not even like judging yourself, you're just like, oh, they look this way, I'm going to try to move my body that way. That kind of thing is enough to pull you out of flow. So the neurological mechanisms of self are very powerful and very easy to activate. So anything I think that makes us more humble in that way, I think it's going to be incredibly, incredibly useful. And with microdosing, I got to shut the fuck up. I don't like it personally. You know what I mean? It's not my thing. And I'm not a big fan of psychedelic culture itself. It can bother me a little bit, but I know way too many people after writing Stealing Fire have come up to me at every level of society, been microdosing for years now, and I'm a little bit to blame for their adventures here, and find it incredibly flowy, right? Yeah. Doesn't work for me, makes me bitchy, right? That's all it does for me. I don't like it at all, but it works for a lot of other people. And Oz clearly is a smart dude. Nutraceuticals are working for Oz, and he thinks I'm full of shit. And, he might be right on this particular, you know what I mean? Like, I may be the minority opinion on this particular one. I think Claire's going to have the last word on this because, as she said, we don't have science yet. We've just got my opinion and your opinion, et cetera, et cetera. On the awe question, this is a much more...
There's an underground supplement that's been going around Venice Beach called Super Flow State. That's been named after you. That's highly illegal, and it's got a unicorn on the front of the bottle. So there you
go. Is it Steven's face with like a unicorn on it?
I'm social distancing. I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about the awe question only because it's pretty different. And interesting. And so there's a lot of there's a lot of scientific evidence that awe may be the front end of a flow state, right? Like what happens in awe, that time dilation you get, and this is work that was done by some people I know at the Cleveland Clinic, that's a dopamine property in awe. You can get time dilation from dopamine alone. And so it seems like awe is essentially the front end of a flow state. When we talk about complexity as a flow trigger, it's the same thing, right? What happens in awe and what happens in flow is the same thing. When you encounter overwhelming complexity, geological time, a night sky, something that your brain can't process consciously, you literally can't process it consciously, right? Your brain kicks it over to the adaptive unconscious because it says, whoa, the geological time, I've got 7 bits of RAM in my working memory. I can't hold infinity in my head, literally. So you kick it over to the subconscious. So it seems like awe is, the front part of that front end of the continuum. Earlier we were talking about the spectrum that goes right from somewhere down, like I'm a little engaged, all the way up to absorption, right? And awe is somewhere on that spectrum, probably with a couple other things going on. So how do you separate that out from flow, and how does awe differ from flow? That's a really interesting question. But certainly the Scott Barry Kaufman's research on flow, and those marvelous women who were at Stanford, I'm blanking their names right now, who found that awe produces humility, right? Like that's one of the things that happens afterwards is you're much humbler in the face of whatever. And all those things, just based on what we know from the autotelic personality, seem to produce more flow. And I think what's interesting here, and I think one of the ways we're going to actually start to settle this question is we know that as you get older, your ego starts to diminish, right? That's it's a normal adult development stage in your 40s, in your 50s, right? So based on that, if skill levels are equal, you should find more flow in people who are over 40 and 50, right? So if we standardize for culture, for income, for blah, 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 and you just go with age as the variable, you might be able to poke at that. So
the teaching moment for coaches is, how do you increase awe? And one is curiosity. So going into your sessions, creating experiences where clients can be in nature, whatnot, where they're able to have that sense of awe helps. And I know, sorry, Steve, I cut you off because I wanted to tie this back to the purpose of the call, the craft of coaching. So I go into my sessions trying to be curious. What can I learn today? What is new about what has happened with the clients since I last seen them? And that enables me to be humble and not have that expert mind, that beginner's mind, and create a sense of awe. So sorry, I just want to add that before, Claire, if you want to jump on.
Like, I never met a tangent I didn't like. So thank you for actually keeping us back on point.
Claire, did you want to mention anything there?
I love the awe, the science around awe. I'm deeply interested in that, and I feel that awe for me is, little micro moments of awe, little micro moments of flow. I'm looking forward to seeing where that research and science goes. It's super interesting. When it comes to the psychedelics or the nootropics or the microdosing, again, it's just an end-one experiment. I have personal experience of that. That's not going to translate to clients. So again, I don't go there with this training. I like this thing of it just being brains and bodies. So this super anti-fragile approach, not even technology. I mean, we have aura rings and things like that, but beyond that, I prefer just to bring it down to the body and the brain and the mindset and the psychological conditions and the external environment, and how you can play with those in terms of flow triggers to increase the likelihood of flow dopamine.
Well said, Claire. Thank you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, Claire, you made me think back to Chris's point on nature. And I think there's definitely a big kind of nature awe combo that happens.
By the way, I can't believe you kept talking, Rian. Like, Claire that was so awesome. That was the mic drop, man. We should have ended there. You should have been like, Claire had the mic drop. You should have ended. I don't know. You're still talking. I'm not sure why. But all right.
I'm sorry,
I think Claire just, she spoke for everybody on that one.
Yeah. Thank you, Claire.
One quick specific question, guys, and maybe Stephen, you can mention this. From Michael, he says, in regards to flow, is The Art of Learning by Josh Waitzkin still a good gateway? Personally, I think it's an amazing gateway. He uses different language and less scientific language, but a lot of the underlying concepts are there, I think. But do you have any thoughts?
Josh. I mean, first of all, Josh is a friend, so I'm biased. But I have, and I agree with you. I think Josh has his own language, and he has a very distinctive framework. And if you know Josh, he is very heart focused. Talks a lot about love, and that's really like a lot of how he thinks about things come from that perspective. And so it's we're coming from very different places, but I do think, I think that's one of the better books that's come out about peak performance in 50 years. Like, I think it's a great book, and I think he's a incredibly talented mind. I think that he's created a framework that is very much based on his personality. And I don't know, does it work for everybody? Could it scale for everyone? And I just don't know at all. He certainly doesn't coach at that level, right? He works with top 1% performers, top 5% performers who want to become top 1%. That's where he sort of specializes. But somebody just, the name of the book is The Art of the Possible.
The Art of Learning.
Claire, or The Art of Learning, because Claire's on the call with us, and she can't be putting everything in
there.
Yeah. By the way, sorry, Freudian slip. Yes, it's called The Art of the Impossible. Buy it on Amazon now.
Yeah, mid-January, people.
No, you can buy it now. You pre-order now.
Oh, damn. There you go. All right, folks, we're getting close to wrapping. I actually want to ask Brent and Claire, do you have any final questions that you'd like for us all to answer?
In what way?
Well, do you just have any questions that you want to close out the conversation with in general? They can be anything.
Comments, questions, opinions?
Comments, questions. Well, comments from me and anyone who's worked with me or done the group calls, you know that I'm super passionate about the translation of this into language and stories and metaphors that are going to translate to a variety of different people, cultures. I mean, I coach a lot of people in India. Prashant, who's on the call here, I see we have really interesting conversation regularly around how do we actually translate this training into the way that's going to land and resonate in India. And he's super excited to kind of work with us on that. And I think that goes for all different countries, cultures, organizations, contexts. And I think that's a super important thing, especially if you're planning to come in and train how to be a coach. A huge part of that is empathy and applied empathy, which means being able to find the language that's going to land and resonate with the people that you want to bring this to. So I think that's a huge responsibility of ours here at the collective, is to give you the credible research and science and then enable you to translate it into contexts that mean that we can scale this globally.
Mm.
Can I ask a question of everybody, all three of you, as a way to close this out? Brent, I know you were going to say something, and I don't care. No, I do care. I'm sorry. Are you feeling safe? Okay. So no, my question is this: over the past year, or year and a half since we've been doing this at this scale, what have you learned while coaching flow that you didn't expect? Like, what shocked you over all three of you, Rian, Brent, Claire? What has shocked you? What has surprised you that has come out of this?
I would say the thing that to this day shocks me is that everyday people are not aware of what they have access to. So athletes, musicians, creatives obviously get into flow easily and experience a high flow lifestyle without probably even realizing. Everyday people are often stuck in that struggle phase of the flow cycle perpetually and just have no idea how easy it could be to be experiencing the joy of flow on a daily basis in whatever they want, whether that's their work, their family lives, their relationships. So this is accessible to anyone and everyone if you're human. And apparently if you're a dog, Stephen, I learned that from you, dogs experience flow. But it's accessible. And again, if you've got a brain and a body, then this can be something that up-levels well-being and performance for everyone. And people just aren't aware of that. So that surprises me.
It's funny, Claire, actually, my answer was going to be something very similar. I was going to say what I find shocking, although this is even before the last year, and actually I more so observed it again during doing interviews, which is basically just the low-hanging fruit that exists in people's lives with respect to peak performance, the tiny, minuscule changes that people could make that they don't make that would make an insane difference to the things they care about most. Whether that's just fixing sleep a little bit or literally not checking a phone the second you wake up and, I don't know, doing an hour of your most important work. But basically just the baseline, and not to sound kind of condescending or anything like that, but the baseline, it shocked me how low the baseline was in general. And that's also for people who are actively interested in seeking this stuff out. And then as a result of that, I mean, the positive side of that is the amount of gain that you can get by implementing, even just like a minuscule percentage of what we teach, say, for example, in Zero to Dangerous.
Agreed.
Steve, I'm not going to answer your damn questions. So,
Yes, love it. Go ahead, Ben. Tell me what you were going to say before. I love you.
So two quick things I was going to say before. So the first is, and this has been hit on prior, in any therapeutic intervention, any modality, ultimately a significant amount of the change that you all will see in your clients' lives is dependent on the common factors, and those common factors being the relationship you develop with your clients. And so by really focusing on that rapport aspect, that is in and of itself doing a lot of the great work. So, you know, as you go into your sessions with clients, certainly have a plan, have interventions, but always remind yourself and take weight off your shoulders to just be fully present there. Use common factors of active listening, empathy, reflection, whatever, you know, there's a number of common factors. Carl Rogers' work is a great source for that. The second piece is, you know, you can have all the strategies and tools and tips, but if you have a sense of identity that, you know, you can't trump your identity. So essentially, if you don't believe you can do this work, or your client can't believe they can accomplish this work to get into flow, it's going to be very, very hard to. So, you know, you can't outwork your self-concept. I think Mike Gervais says it that way. And so, you know, applying all the flow science you're learning, and then also helping them just develop a core belief, doing some optimism training is important. The last thing to answer your question, Stephen, I would say is this sense of humility that the clients come to this work with. You know, a lot of them come with a real willingness to learn, a real willingness to be kind of co-creators in the experience of developing their high flow lifestyle and applying the work. So it's a joy to work with everyone and jump on the calls, because you know, they are connected, they are present, and they aren't trying to, they're not there to argue. They're there to learn and to dispute and find the best path for them. So that I'd say it's the greatest joy, is the humility. And one last thing, my first client was that someone who was 80 years old, and so everyone is able to do this work and to step into it, and they don't have to be a high performer in the typical realm. It could be anyone from a homemaker to whomever. And so I want to just emphasize that this work benefits anyone's life, and it doesn't have to be someone who's in a traditional high performing context, we could say.
Love that, Brent. Lots of mic drops today.
Yeah.
So hopefully everyone who's listening isn't in a flow state, because I want to mention the Flow Trainer Accelerator again, without manipulating you all. But if you're interested in applying to work with us, to go deeper into flow research and science.
Wait, are you flashing the subliminal messages? Did you get those?
Exactly.
Right?
Okay. The NLP is coming through.
Good.
Yeah, if you want to go deeper with us to really learn this stuff in depth and kind of master a full framework around peak performance and flow, and coaching it and teaching and training others in it, and also doing some of your own research, which is part of the Flow Trainer Accelerator, you can apply on the green button there. Again, it's $100 fully refundable deposit. We'll talk with you over the phone to see if it's a good fit, give you all of the other info that you need about it, so you can make a good informed decision when you're sober. And you'll also get an opportunity to work with any of the coaches that you've seen today. So obviously Brent and Claire. Claire does an amazing job of leading the entire program. And then also the rest of our coaches here at the collective, including now Scott Barry Kaufman as well. Actually, we haven't fully announced that yet, but that's happening. So yeah, if that's of interest, guys, you can apply with the green button there, and the deposit will lead to a call. And again, if it doesn't make sense to continue with the training, the deposit will be refunded. Anyway, thank you all, guys, for joining us. Stephen, you want to mention any final things before we close out?
I just, you know, if Chris and Sarah are still watching, thank you for lending us your brains and your wisdom. That was awesome. Claire, Brent, as always, I learned so much listening to you guys. I really appreciate it. And Rian, you kicked ass. And I'm seeing I'm seeing the same names of people hanging out with us since we started this thing. And I just got to say to all of you, don't you have anything better to do? I'm like, come on, what the hell's wrong with you? Anyways, it's really amazing to see so many familiar faces. This is actually starting to feel a little bit like a collective. Go figure.
Yeah.
So thank you all. I appreciate it. It was great. It was great hanging out with you again.
Thanks, guys. It's been a blast. All the best. And thanks, Claire and Brent, as well. You guys were great.
Great job, Rian. Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you, guys. Bye-bye, everybody. Wait, next month, somebody asked this in the chat. Next month, we are going to have Will Kleindon from High Energetics to talk about cannabis and flow, along with Jason Silva, who will also be talking about cannabis and flow and creativity. And he'll have enough energy for 17 of us. It'll be really fun.
First, go ahead, Stephen. Sorry.
Please. No.
No, I was just going to say first Thursday of every month. You guys can even throw in your calendar. I don't think we can send out a 1,000-person calendar event, but this time, the first Thursday of every month for good, basically, we're going to be doing these. So,
Awesome.
yeah, you can book it in.
Guys, thank you again. Nice to see everybody.
Thank you.
Have a great month.
See you guys. All the best.